You'd welcome fellow travelers on this winding road. Ever heard the saying, play stupid games, win stupid prizes? It's more than just a catchy phrase. It's a fundamental law of how things work. And right now, a whole bunch of folks are finding that out. The hard way, their carefully constructed worlds crumbling around them. This isn't some random occurrence. It's a pattern I've seen play out time and time again. Human behavior shows us that groups built on lies, envy, and backstabbing tend to self-destruct faster than those united by a genuine purpose. Why? Because in the end, betrayal doesn't need outside help. It devours itself from the inside. You're about to witness this truth unfold in real time. Those who thought they were untouchable, who reveled in plotting in the shadows, are now tripping over their own schemes. Their downfall isn't just coming, it's already here. And here's the kicker, you don't have to lift a finger. You're not the judge or executioner. Life itself is putting on the show. And trust me, it's got a front row seat with your name on it. So grab some popcorn, settle in, and prepare for a spectacle unlike any other. This isn't just your run-of-the-mill drama. It's cosmic irony served with a side of poetic justice. Every player who thought they were calling the shots is finally learning the oldest rule in the book: you play, you pay. And the biggest thing they forgot: the game was rigged from the start. That's the core truth they never grasped. They thought they were smart enough, unified enough, or manipulative enough to bend reality to their will. But the moment they chose to act with malice towards you, their fate was sealed. Not because you're perfect, but because certain choices come with built-in consequences. When people are driven by envy, deceit, and hate, they're not writing their own story. They're locking themselves into a predetermined narrative where exposure and ruin are the only possible outcomes. That's what makes their arrogance so tragically ironic. They strutted in, convinced the odds were in their favor, believing that numbers, whispers, alliances, and scheming would guarantee their victory. But games like these aren't won with numbers. They're won through alignment. They played for destruction, and destruction never rewards its players. They failed to realize that while they thought they were building a strategy, they were actually constructing a trap around themselves. Every lie, every scheme, every deceptive move was another brick in their own prison. The deception they fell for was this: they thought their actions were hidden, that nobody would connect the dots, that they could use you and walk away unscathed. But rigged games have a cruel twist. They give you the illusion of winning long enough to blind you before everything falls apart. That false sense of control was their undoing. While they laughed, while they celebrated, while they thought they had you cornered, the clock was ticking on their demise. And now the irony is unfolding in plain sight. The very tools they used as weapons are the very things exposing them. The whispered conversations are resurfacing, the alliances are crumbling. The false confidence they exuded is being eaten alive by a truth they can no longer control. What seemed like a brilliant plan has turned into a trail of evidence they can't erase. And the most brutal part, they thought the game was about you, but it was always about the consequences of their own choices. They played, and in doing so, they trapped themselves in a system that was never designed to let them win. Now let's be clear about something else. Survival isn't about being untouched. It's about outlasting. That's the crucial mistake this group made. They mistakenly believed that strength came from numbers, from how many people opposed you or how loudly they could shout together. But true survival has nothing to do with crowd size or volume. It's about who can endure when the pressure is relentless, when the heat doesn't let up, when the storm refuses to pass. Endurance always trumps mere appearance. They figured they could wear you down by attacking as a pack. Their logic was simple: if one person can't break you, maybe 5 or 10 can. But they overlooked a fundamental law. The more people you gather in negativity, the weaker the structure becomes. Groups built on envy and hate always implode faster because they're fueled by fleeting emotions, not genuine conviction. When the pressure intensifies, those emotions evaporate, and suddenly the once formidable group has no backbone. Meanwhile, the person they tried to crush is still standing tall. Endurance isn't glamorous, and that's why they underestimated it. They mistook your ability to keep moving forward day after day as something ordinary. But survival is never ordinary when you're outlasting plots designed to erase you. You didn't need to engage in loud battles to prove yourself. You simply had to remain consistent. While they wasted their energy watching you, competing with you, and trying to drain you, you conserved yours. That's why they're crumbling one by one. Now their downfall is manifesting in subtle yet unmistakable ways. Relationships that once appeared rock solid are fracturing. Friendships within the group are strained because mistrust flourishes where jealousy festers. The energy they once devoted to targeting you is now consuming them from the inside out. They can't sustain the same intensity they started with because hate isn't a long-lasting fuel. It burns people out. And while they're running on fumes, you're still steady, moving forward with a strength they can't comprehend. That's what outlasting truly means. It's not about emerging unscathed. It's about proving that even with scars, you're still here while their entire foundation has collapsed. Survival might not be pretty, but it's undeniable. You're still in the game and they're not. And remember, this judgment doesn't strike like lightning. It bleeds them slowly. That's the part they never anticipated. They imagined that if something were to happen to them, it would be swift and dramatic. A sudden exposure, a major scandal, a rapid downfall. But life rarely operates that way. The most devastating punishment isn't the kind that knocks you down instantly. It's the kind that chips away at you bit by bit until you no longer recognize yourself. That's the kind of judgment this group is now experiencing. Initially, nothing seemed amiss. They were still laughing, still confident, still certain of their schemes. But over time, small cracks began to appear. The money they relied on started to dwindle. The relationships they depended on began to feel unstable. The confidence they displayed so boldly started to waver in subtle ways. It wasn't one massive collapse. It was the slow unraveling of everything they thought was secure. And that's a far more terrifying reality than a sudden disaster, because they're forced to watch their own lives disintegrate in slow motion. This gradual erosion strips them of the one thing they always valued most: control. When judgment strikes like lightning, at least you can process the blow and start anew. But when it comes gradually, you never know which aspect of your life will crumble next. It keeps them in a perpetual state of anxiety. They wake up each day wondering what's going to fall apart. Will it be trust, reputation, health, or stability? That's the torment of slow justice. It leaves them restless, sleepless, and powerless. The very pride that fueled their actions makes this process even more excruciating. They can't admit to anyone what's really happening because doing so would mean admitting they were wrong all along. So they suffer in silence, trying to maintain an image that's already collapsing beneath them. What once felt like a victory now feels like a curse because every win they claimed is turning into evidence of their downfall. That's why this kind of judgment is so final. It doesn't just punish, it dismantles, it takes away piece by piece until nothing is left but the truth they can't escape. Their downfall wasn't sudden, it was inevitable. They aren't being struck down, they're being bled dry. Furthermore, remember that betrayal always boomerangs. The very words they thought would vanish into the darkness are now shining in the light impossible to conceal. Every whisper, every secret plot, every calculated lie they crafted to manipulate and destroy has a way of circling back stronger and sharper than they imagined. They believed that shadows could shield them, that hidden schemes would remain invisible. But the truth has a stubborn way of following the trail of deceit. Every blade they threw in secret, every trap they set, every attempt to undermine you is now returning with precision, striking at the foundations of their own lives. They don't see it yet, but the very energy they poured into harming you is the energy undoing them. The lies that once served as weapons are now the chains binding them, exposing their intentions to anyone willing to see. Friends, colleagues, even casual observers begin to notice the patterns. The stories that don't quite add up, the inconsistencies that make the picture of their intentions undeniable. The betrayal they assumed was hidden becomes visible in the smallest ways, like cracks forming in walls that were never truly strong. It's poetic in its own harsh way. The universe doesn't need to intervene directly. It simply allows cause and effect to run its course. Every action returns in kind. Every attempt to harm you strengthens the mechanism that will unravel them. And what they once thought was clever, the manipulation, the gossip, the hidden agendas, becomes the very evidence that proves their true nature. The people they thought they could deceive are finally seeing through the mask, and there's no one left to shield them from the consequences. The lesson is brutal and undeniable. Betrayal is never a one-way street. It carries a debt, and debts in this game are collected without mercy. They acted thinking only of the short term, failing to recognize that every lie has a life of its own. Now each whisper, each knife in the back, each manipulation circles back not as rumor but as undeniable truth. Every time they look around, they are reminded that the energy they spent destroying others is the energy consuming them from within. In the end, the only surprise is that they are finally realizing it too late. And finally, group evil always dies by internal cannibalism. No alliance built on jealousy, envy, or destruction has any real staying power. What they perceived as strength in numbers was actually weakness in disguise. Every interaction, every agreement, every handshake between them was fueled by suspicion and self-interest, not trust or genuine loyalty. Their group wasn't a team. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark, and that spark was inevitable. The moment stress, pressure, or opportunity arises, the cracks begin to appear. One by one, small betrayals emerge, each one feeding the next, until the group starts to eat itself alive. Words whispered in confidence turn into accusations. Loyalty turns into bargaining, and alliances formed out of convenience collapse under the weight of fear. Every member becomes both predator and prey because when a foundation is built on envy, the only language they understand is treachery. What makes this internal collapse so brutal is that it's invisible until it's too late. Outsiders see a strong, unified front, but behind closed doors, the rot is spreading faster than anyone could anticipate. They attack each other over petty slights, imagined slights, and opportunities to appear superior. Every attempt to protect oneself becomes another weapon against the group, accelerating the implosion. There's no need for an external force. The poison they injected into the system flows back on them, naturally eroding cohesion until nothing is left. This is the natural law of destructive alliances. Energy spent harming others inside the group never disappears. It redirects internally, manifesting as paranoia, resentment, and sabotage. They can't sustain harmony because they never valued it. They only valued dominance and survival at another's expense. The very traits that seem to make them dangerous in the beginning. Cunning, manipulation, ruthlessness are the traits that guarantee their own destruction. In the end, the group devours itself piece by piece. Friends become enemies, leaders become liabilities, and alliances dissolve into chaos. There's no grand finale, no dramatic showdown, just a quiet, inevitable self-destruction. What remains is the unmistakable truth: groups built on malice cannot survive. Internal cannibalism doesn't discriminate. It destroys everyone involved, leaving only lessons for those wise enough to avoid following the same path. You remained untouchable because you never played their game. The group kept mistaking your silence for weakness, assuming that if you weren't visibly fighting back, you were easy prey. They didn't realize that silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's strategy, a shield built from patience and understanding. While they were busy moving pieces, setting traps, and trying to force reactions, you were moving in a completely different dimension, guided by alignment rather than reaction. Their rules were never your rules, and that's why none of their efforts could touch you. Every attempt they made to manipulate, intimidate, or provoke you failed, not because of luck, but because you operated on a level they couldn't even recognize. Their energy, so focused on creating chaos, was wasted against someone who refused to meet them on the battlefield they designed. You didn't chase their illusions of power or get caught up in the games they invented. You stayed steady, consistent, and true to a path that was entirely your own. The more they tried, the clearer it became that their tactics could never land. That untouchability isn't arrogance, it's a consequence of discipline and foresight. You knew that every lie, every plot, every whisper of sabotage was temporary, and that reacting to it would only trap you in their world. Instead, you invested your energy in alignment, aligning with truth, with purpose, with the natural flow of life. While they scrambled to control outcomes, you were growing stronger, more visible in ways they couldn't mimic or suppress. The irony is brutal. The harder they fought, the faster they exposed themselves, while your power only solidified quietly in the background. In the end, their collapse isn't just about their failure. It's about your immunity. You weren't invincible because you were fearless or loud. You were untouchable because you refused to enter their arena. While they spun themselves into chaos, you moved forward unscathed, rising steadily as the consequence of your restraint and focus. The game they tried to impose on you became irrelevant, and now they're left crumbling under the weight of their own strategies while you stand completely outside it, untouchable, unshaken, and undeniably victorious. Let's be clear about something else. The more they watch, the faster they rot. Their obsession with you has become the engine of their own destruction. Every hour they spent tracking your moves, analyzing your patterns, and plotting how to corner you was an hour stolen from their own lives, from their own growth, from the responsibilities and opportunities that actually mattered. Their focus was so consumed by you that they completely lost sight of themselves, and that loss isn't subtle, it's corrosive. What they fail to see is that obsession never empowers the watcher. It destroys them. Their energy, instead of being invested in progress or purpose, is wasted on surveillance, speculation, and envy. The mind becomes a prison when it's chained to someone else's life, constantly calculating, reacting, and worrying. While they thought they were gaining an advantage, they were quietly eroding their own stability, relationships, and mental peace. Every glance toward you, every conversation about you, every assumption they made became another nail in the coffin of their clarity and control. Meanwhile, their neglect of their own path accelerates the decay. Bills pile up, responsibilities go unmet, relationships strain, and ambitions stall. They are blind to their own downfall because all their attention is glued to your existence. They're rotting from the inside, consumed by comparison, envy, and paranoia, while outwardly pretending everything is fine. The tragedy is that they don't even recognize it. The more they watch, the less they notice, until suddenly they're hollow shells of the people they thought they were. The cruelest irony is that their obsession, meant to give them power over you, has no effect on your trajectory. You continue forward, building, growing, and thriving, completely unaffected by their scrutiny. Their energy feeds nothing but their own decline, and every attempt to influence or anticipate you only tightens the spiral. In their effort to control what is not theirs, they've surrendered control over what is theirs to keep. In the end, their downfall is inevitable. They rot not because you struck at them, not because you intervened, but because fixation consumes faster than force ever could. The more they watched you, the faster they lost themselves, and while they're trapped in obsession, your life keeps moving forward, unbothered, unstoppable, and completely free from their decay. Let's also remember that masks melt under the heat of time. At first, they were flawless in their performance, charming, trustworthy, united, untouchable. Everyone believed in the image they presented because it was carefully constructed, polished, and rehearsed. But no mask, no matter how well made, can survive constant scrutiny and pressure. Time doesn't rush, and it doesn't forgive. It patiently exposes cracks, inconsistencies, and weaknesses, slowly burning away every layer of pretense until the truth underneath can no longer hide. What's terrifying for them is that the reveal doesn't need drama or confrontation. It happens quietly, naturally, through behavior, through moments they cannot control, and through the consequences of their own choices. The charming smiles start to slip. The confident tones falter. The unity they relied on for strength fractures under small pressures they never anticipated. Desperation leaks into every interaction. Bitterness stains every word, and fear becomes impossible to hide. That's the heat of time. It doesn't attack externally, it works from the inside, exposing what was always there. Now the people who once believed in their carefully crafted persona see the real faces full of regret, tension, and vulnerability. The masks that convinced others to trust them, to follow them, to admire them are gone, leaving only the raw, unfiltered reality behind. What seemed solid was never truly there. It was an illusion waiting to collapse. And that collapse doesn't just affect the group. It ripples outward, revealing patterns of deception, self-interest, and fragility that were invisible when the mask was on. Time doesn't forgive performance built on lies. It doesn't care about strategy, planning, or manipulation. Its only law is that truth will surface, and as their masks melt, what remains isn't just disappointment. It's humiliation, exposure, and the undeniable proof that what they projected was never who they were. The heat of time shows everyone the people behind the performance, and once the truth is out, it can never be hidden again. Their carefully constructed image has collapsed, leaving them raw, exposed, and powerless in a way that no plot, no alliance, no scheme could ever protect them from. Collective sin creates collective collapse. What they built together, fueled by envy, deceit, and selfish ambition, was never sustainable. They thought that acting as a group would provide cover, that hiding behind numbers would make them untouchable. They believed that if everyone participated, no one would stand out and their wrongdoings would be invisible. But sin, especially when shared, amplifies consequences instead of diluting them. The energy they poured into manipulation, lies, and schemes doesn't dissipate. It accumulates, forming a force that eventually crushes everyone involved. They assumed that hiding in a crowd would protect them, that being part of a collective shielded them from individual accountability. But there's a law at work stronger than any strategy they could concoct. When wrongdoing is shared, exposure becomes inevitable. One weak link, one mistake, one act of conscience among them, and the structure begins to unravel. The very alliances that seemed like strength turn into chains, binding each member to the consequences of everyone else's choices. What they thought was safety in numbers is actually a trap, and there's no escape for anyone attached. When heaven or the natural order decrees exposure, it doesn't separate the guilty. It doesn't excuse the ones who stayed in the shadows or played a smaller part. The decree hits all connected points simultaneously, dragging everyone down. The fall of one becomes the fall of all, and there's no exception. Their unity, once their perceived advantage, becomes the mechanism of their destruction. Every shared lie, every joint act of deceit, every agreement to betray or manipulate compounds until there's no way to untangle the web. The collapse is inevitable and thorough. The energy that once fueled their schemes now works against them, eroding trust, loyalty, and power from the inside. Relationships fracture, alliances crumble, and the group's cohesion disintegrates under the weight of its collective sins. In the end, Their attempt to protect themselves through numbers only ensures that no one survives unscathed. The lesson is absolute. When wrongdoing is shared, accountability is shared, and the collapse is collective, leaving no one untouched by the consequences of their own and each other's choices. Their loss feels deeply personal because their entire identity was built on you. They weren't fighting for achievement, recognition, or progress. They were fighting for your failure, measuring their value against your struggles, hoping that your downfall would elevate them. Every strategy, every plot, every whisper behind your back wasn't about creating something of their own. It was about proving they could break you. Your existence became their yardstick, the standard by which they gauged their worth. Without your collapse, all of that effort becomes meaningless, and that's where the pain begins. They invested so much of themselves in your defeat that your survival isn't just a minor inconvenience, it's existential. Your ability to endure, to rise above their schemes, and to continue on your path shatters the foundation they built around their identity. Suddenly, the stories they told themselves about power, control, and superiority start to crumble. They realize that every boast, every manipulation, every carefully crafted act of sabotage was never about strength. It was about control over you, and control was never theirs to hold. The deeper tragedy for them is that this collapse is undeniable. Their sense of self was intertwined with the idea that you would fail. Now that you haven't, every mirror they look into reflects someone smaller than they thought, someone dependent on someone else's weakness to feel significant. The fear, the bitterness, the envy that drove them is now feeding itself, creating a cycle of frustration and confusion that they can't escape. They are left questioning who they are when their entire persona was built on something that never existed outside of your struggles. Meanwhile, you move forward untouched by the weight of their obsession. Your survival doesn't require confrontation or proof. It simply exists, and that is enough to dismantle everything they thought defined them. The irony is brutal. The more they tried to destroy you, the more they exposed themselves. And now their identity, built entirely on your presumed failure, is collapsing in real time. Every attempt to regain a sense of power only reminds them of what they lack, making your presence the invisible executioner of their own undoing. Remember that power without morality always self-destructs. They might have had influence, numbers, wealth, and status, but none of it had a foundation. They built their power on manipulation, lies, and selfish ambition, assuming that control over others was the same as real strength. What they failed to understand is that power without integrity is not power at all. It's a slow-acting poison. The higher they climbed, the more the corruption inside them festered, turning their victories into hollow triumphs, and their achievements into traps they couldn't escape. Every step they took to dominate or manipulate became another step in their own undoing. Deals made without conscience, alliances formed for convenience, and victories achieved at the expense of others carried a hidden cost: their own destruction. The influence they wielded so confidently was built on unstable ground, and the weight of their own misdeeds gradually pulled them under. It wasn't external forces that were dismantling them. It was the disease inside their own character. Even when they succeeded, the success came with rot baked into it. Every reward, every title, every recognition was poisoned because it was gained without fairness, honesty, or ethics. They couldn't enjoy what they thought they earned because the very acts that created it were tearing them apart from the inside. Their pride blinded them to the decay until it was too late. And the higher they rose, the more evident it became to everyone around them that their victories carried no true power, only the consequences of moral bankruptcy. The collapse is inevitable because integrity is the only invisible armor strong enough to sustain real influence. Without it, even the most impressive empires crumble because power alone can't defend against decay within. What looked like unstoppable success is actually a countdown to exposure and failure. Every moment they relied on manipulation instead of principle, they accelerated their own self-destruction. In the end, they discover the hardest truth: power without morality doesn't just fail. It consumes the person who wields it. Their authority, influence, and victories were never secure because they lacked the one thing that turned strength into legacy: integrity. The disease they ignored finally devours them, leaving nothing behind but a cautionary tale of what happens when power is divorced from conscience. And let's not forget that exposure isn't loud, it's inevitable. They believed that if they buried the truth deep enough, if they controlled the narrative tightly, no one would ever see what they had done. They imagined that secrets could remain hidden forever, that lies could replace reality, and that the world would never notice the cracks forming beneath their carefully constructed image. But truth has a way of surfacing not with a bang, but with a slow, relentless certainty that no amount of manipulation can stop. It doesn't need a stage, microphones, or headlines to reveal itself. Exposure works quietly, almost invisibly. It comes in patterns that repeat too often to ignore, in conversations that accidentally leak what was meant to be concealed, and in behaviors that contradict the stories they've told. Small inconsistencies once overlooked accumulate until they form a complete picture that is undeniable. What was once secret becomes obvious, and by the time they realize it, everyone else already knows. The irony is brutal. Their attempts to control perception only accelerate the process. By obsessing over cover-ups, creating alibis, and manipulating appearances, they generate the very evidence that exposes them. Lies that were meant to hide the truth become the markers of it, and every attempt to explain, excuse, or redirect attention only tightens the circle around them. The world doesn't need to be told. It begins to see patterns, recognize repeated behaviors, and connect dots that they assumed would never be connected. And while they scramble to regain control, the exposure continues quietly but relentlessly. Friends, colleagues, and observers begin to understand the reality of what happens, sometimes without a single word from you. The truth emerges naturally, like water finding its way through cracks, and by the time they understand that the walls are crumbling, it's too late. The beauty and terror of exposure is that it's impartial and inevitable. It doesn't matter how clever they were, how carefully they plotted, or how much energy they spent hiding their actions. The truth always finds its way out. And when it does, it doesn't just reveal them. It leaves them powerless while the reality they tried to erase stands unshakable, undeniable, and absolute. You became the mirror they can't escape. Every glance at you, every mention of your name, every memory of your presence forces them to confront themselves in ways they never wanted. They see what they have done, the lies they told, the betrayals they orchestrated, and the ways they allowed greed, envy, and cruelty to define them. You don't need to act, speak, or retaliate. Your very existence reflects back the truth of their corruption with a clarity they can't ignore. This is why they feel so uncomfortable around you. It isn't about fear of confrontation or revenge. It's about an internal reckoning they are incapable of facing. You embody the contrast between what they pretended to be and what they really are. Every time they observe your calm, your progress, or your unshakable presence, they are reminded of the emptiness of their own efforts. Their attempts to diminish you, manipulate reality, or rewrite history fail. Because you are living proof that their strategies were never effective. The mirror effect is relentless. They can't hide from it. And the more they try, the more it stings. They start noticing the ways in which their own decisions backfired, how alliances cracked, how reputations crumbled, and how you remained untouched by the chaos they created. Your success, stability, and clarity become the measure of everything they lost or never had. They don't even need anyone to point it out. The reflection is unavoidable. This is what makes your presence so unbearable to them. You are the constant reminder that their actions have consequences and that nothing they built on deception or malice could ever last. You don't need to prove anything, and you don't need to strike. They are already witnessing the results of their own choices through you. Every interaction, every observation, every fleeting thought about you forces them to face the reality they tried to escape, and that realization alone carries a weight they cannot bear. In essence, you are not just surviving. You are a living indictment of their failures. Your very being exposes what they try to hide, holding up a mirror they cannot turn away from and leaving them powerless to escape the truth of who they really are. And finally, divine justice doesn't miss. It just waits for the perfect timing. They assumed that silence, delay, or distance could protect them, that if no one noticed immediately, the consequences would never come. They believed that time was on their side, that every lie, betrayal, or scheme could slip quietly into the shadows. But timing is the true weapon of divine justice, precise and patient, biding its moment until every falsehood is fully exposed. Every mask has fallen and the world can no longer ignore the truth. What makes this form of justice unstoppable is that it doesn't act hastily. It observes, it waits, it allows every action, every decision, and every misstep to play itself out fully. They may celebrate temporary victories or enjoy fleeting control. But each one of those moments is merely setting the stage for the ultimate reveal. The perfection of timing ensures that when justice arrives, it is undeniable. Every witness, every participant, every observer sees it clearly. And there's no room for manipulation, excuses, or escape. They cannot speed it up, stop it, or bargain with it. The delay they mistook for mercy is actually the instrument that makes the consequences most inescapable. By waiting, divine justice ensures that every lie, every betrayal, and every hidden act comes into full view, the audience sees the unmasking, the patterns align, and the truth becomes impossible to deny. Their carefully constructed illusions crumble because the timing is orchestrated so perfectly that even their desperation cannot alter the outcome. In this way, silence and delay are not safety. They are exposure incubators. Every second they wait, every plot they hatch, every attempt to avoid accountability is being recorded in the natural order. And when the moment arrives, it is so complete, so absolute, and so precise that nothing can shift the impact. There are no coincidences, no accidents, no second chances. Ultimately, divine justice strikes not out of anger or haste, but out of perfect calculation. It waits until every weakness is visible, every truth undeniable, and every audience fully attentive. When it moves, it leaves no doubt, no loophole, and no escape, and in that strike, the reality of what really happened is revealed in a way that they cannot deny, challenge, or avoid, proving that justice never misses. It simply chooses the moment when the lesson hits hardest. The story isn't just about conflict, it's about inevitability. Every move, every whisper, every scheme, and every attempt to manipulate was destined to circle back not because of chance, but because truth, alignment, and justice operate on a level far beyond human calculation. They thought they controlled the game, that numbers, power, and cunning could shield them from consequences. What they didn't realize is that their own choices were the architects of their downfall. And while they scrambled in desperation, the path of inevitability carried forward without pause. Every act of betrayal they unleashed returned to them sharper than they expected. Every alliance built on envy, manipulation, or deceit dissolved from within. The masks they wore melted under the heat of time, exposing the hollow, desperate realities behind the facades. And while they focused all their energy on controlling you, on observing and undermining, they lost themselves, their identities, their purpose, and their strength corroded from the inside out. Meanwhile, you moved forward untouchable, aligned, and unshaken, a living reflection of integrity and survival. This isn't luck. It isn't coincidence. And it isn't even revenge. It's the undeniable law of alignment, cause and effect, and divine timing. The energy they poured into destruction became the force that dismantled them. The very presence of truth, your presence, held a mirror they could not escape, forcing them to confront themselves in ways they never wanted to see. And when divine justice arrived, perfectly timed and unavoidable, it exposed every lie, every betrayal, and every hollow victory in plain sight, leaving them powerless to rewrite history. In the end, this isn't a story of chaos. It's a story of inevitability and exposure. Their collapse was never about you being strong or them being weak. It was about truth being inevitable, justice being patient, and integrity outlasting manipulation. You didn't need to fight. You didn't need to act, and you didn't need to prove a thing. Your existence, your alignment, and your survival spoke louder than any plot, any lie, or any scheme ever could. They played, they tried, they failed, and the world witnessed it, one undeniable moment at a time, 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 at a time. Welcome, chosen ones. Never judge a warrior by their glow. Some of the most radiant faces shield the most formidable survival stories. Let's be honest, looking younger than your age is a compliment until it transforms into a proving ground. Studies reveal that individuals who appear significantly younger than their actual age are often underestimated, overlooked for positions of influence, and even targeted because others presume they are inexperienced, naive, or easily manipulated. And if you're divinely touched, that glow isn't solely the result of skincare and smoothies. It's divine preservation, a form of spiritual alchemy, grace illuminated. But here's the crux of the matter. Because your exterior doesn't reflect the depth of your journey, some assume you haven't journeyed at all. Consequently, they attempt to treat you like a novice, unaware that they've just activated a seasoned spiritual strategist cloaked in youthfulness. They observe your seemingly untouched countenance and conclude, this one is easily outmaneuvered. They are oblivious to the fact that you have already navigated infernos they are still fueling for others. This message is tailored for those who've been misjudged, underestimated, and prematurely dismissed simply because your youthful aura suggests a 20-something while your spirit resonates with the wisdom of someone who has communed with the divine in the wilderness. What do you desire? And rest assured, we'll infuse some levity into the conversation. Because if you've ever encountered a 50-year-old narcissist attempting to lecture you on life while you were quietly orchestrating their downfall, you deserve a moment of amusement. So prepare yourself. By the conclusion of this piece, they'll wish they had solicited your insight instead of scrutinizing your complexion for signs of aging. Let's begin. Number 1. They mistook youthful appearance for emotional immaturity. They presumed your emotional resilience was lacking due to your youthful visage. That was their initial miscalculation. They assessed your flawless complexion, luminous eyes, and composed demeanor, deciding, this individual must be naive, unseasoned, or easily influenced. They envisioned manipulating you with falsehoods, bewildering you with convoluted arguments, and manipulating you into questioning your own judgment. In their estimation, you were a blank canvas, ripe for molding, controlling, or suppressing. However, what they failed to comprehend was that your youthful appearance was not indicative of ignorance, but rather the byproduct of wisdom that had already worked its transformative magic. You appeared youthful not because of a life devoid of hardship, but because you had fought relentlessly for your inner peace and navigated your personal tempests with resilience. They couldn't perceive the internal skirmishes you had already survived, the betrayals you had forgiven without the solace of an apology, the spiritual battles you had endured in solitude. They were unaware of the countless nights you had to parent yourself, comfort yourself, and reconstruct your identity from fragmented pieces. They couldn't fathom that someone who exuded such freshness had already mourned and buried versions of themselves shattered by heartbreak, rejection, and isolation. They had no inkling that your quiet confidence stemmed from a profound self-awareness, a knowing that transcended the need for external validation. Therefore, when they approached you with manipulative tactics, you remained impervious. When they sought to test your boundaries, you surpassed their expectations effortlessly. You anticipated their maneuvers before they articulated them. You sensed their energy before they uttered a single word. While they believed they were engaged in a game of chess, You were already executing moves several steps ahead, not out of a desire to dominate, but because you had already lived through similar scenarios countless times in reality. They conflated softness with simplicity, but you allowed them to persist in their illusion because the most effective method of exposing a person's true character is to permit them to believe they are superior to you. And now that the truth has been unveiled, they struggle to reconcile the fact that the seemingly vulnerable target they identified was in fact someone anointed, protected, and endowed with wisdom, far exceeding their own contrived intelligence. Number 2, you embody ancient wisdom within a youthful form. People experienced a sense of bewilderment upon meeting you. You possessed a youthful radiance brimming with vitality, yet your presence exuded an undeniable sense of antiquity, a profound depth that was palpable. They struggled to articulate it, but they felt it nonetheless. They perceived you as merely another youthful face, someone lacking in experience, still grappling with the complexities of the world. However, the reality was that your soul had traversed realms that most individuals wouldn't survive even in their nightmares. You didn't emanate the energy of someone new to existence. Rather, you carried the weight of someone who had witnessed it all and returned with divine directives. That was the concept they couldn't grasp. How could someone so youthful in appearance articulate such profound authority? How could someone with such a gentle aura possess eyes that reflected generations of pain, triumph, and spiritual awakening? Your wisdom wasn't gleaned from textbooks or influenced by fleeting trends. You were forged in the crucible of divine encounters, supernatural revelations, and real-world conflicts that catalyzed your inner transformation. The outward image they beheld didn't align with the potent energy that flowed through you, and as a consequence of this disparity, they underestimated your capabilities. They condescended to you, believing they were imparting valuable insights when in reality they were merely regurgitating concepts you had long since transcended. They attempted to impart lessons you had already internalized in solitude, without fanfare, in environments where no one extended a helping hand. They perceived themselves as more intelligent, more advanced, more capable. Yet each time you spoke, something within them quieted, not due to the volume of your voice, but because your truth resonated with a dissonance they were unprepared to confront. You embody ancient wisdom not acquired through conventional means, but rather remembered, activated within you as you embraced your calling. You're not here to conform to predetermined timelines. You're here to disrupt them. Your actions are guided not solely by logic, but by revelation, which explains why people are either drawn to you or exposed by you. The radiance emanating from your face is divine preservation, while the force underpinning your words is sacred memory. They assumed you were a novice. They thought they could exploit you. However, upon encountering your energy, they realized they were in the presence of something far older, wiser, and more formidable than they could ever fathom. Number 3, they anticipated timidity but encountered a warrior in disguise. They expected you to exhibit timidity. They genuinely believed you would recoil, falter, or collapse under pressure. That's their usual modus operandi: seek out those who appear gentle, serene, and unconcerned, and automatically equate those traits with weakness. You appeared composed, youthful, like someone easily intimidated. However, what they failed to perceive was that beneath that tranquil surface resided someone who had endured more battles than they could possibly envision. They presumed you would be a pushover, only to discover someone who had already learned to stand independently, to articulate their truth when necessary, and to gracefully disengage without creating a commotion. You weren't ostentatious, but you were undeniably potent. They mistook your silence for apprehension, unaware that it was a manifestation of discipline. They expected you to seek validation, but you remained unfazed when they withheld it. They attempted to provoke a reaction, but were met only with clarity and unwavering boundaries. It was then that they realized their misjudgment. You weren't someone to be trifled with. Your reactions differed from those of others. You remained unimpressed by their titles, their fabricated confidence, and their passive-aggressive maneuvers. They had formulated plans to manipulate you, and now they were perplexed as to why their strategies were failing. The reality was that they were engaging with a warrior disguised in civilian clothing. You didn't arrive adorned for battle. Instead, you were clad in grace, serenity, and quietude. However, that didn't imply a lack of preparedness. What they failed to recognize was that your training had been experiential, not superficial. You had cultivated the ability to discern energy, recognize patterns, and navigate situations with astute judgment. You didn't need to resort to shouting to command attention. You didn't need to engage in combat to achieve victory. Your strength wasn't derived from aggression, but from restraint. And now they are at a loss as to how to respond to you. Those who sought to control you now actively avoid you. Those who underestimated you are now questioning their own assumptions. The same individuals who initially perceived you as pliable are now realizing your resilience, your discernment, and your unwillingness to tolerate nonsense. You didn't raise your voice, but you raised the standard, and that's what unnerved them. They believed they were entering a playground only to encounter someone who had already survived a war. Number 4. Your radiance was misinterpreted as an invitation for exploitation. They beheld your glow and concluded that you were readily available for exploitation. That's how superficial their perception was. They assumed that because you exuded peace, warmth, and kindness, you were easily manipulated, easily guilted, and easily controlled. They believed that your light implied an inability to refuse. They mistook your compassion for vulnerability. They didn't understand that your energy was precious and that despite your radiance, you weren't obligated to bear the burden of everyone else's negativity. Individuals of that ilk often confuse generosity with consent. They perceive a kind gesture as permission to disrespect you. They witness your swiftness to forgive and assume you'll tolerate anything. However, what they failed to consider was that your light wasn't merely an external glow. It was a filter, an intrinsic system that revealed intentions. The moment they attempted to extract too much, your spirit alerted you. Your intuition heightened. Your inner voice spoke up. You may have afforded individuals a chance, but once they began treating your radiance as a resource to deplete, rather than a gift to appreciate, every fiber of your being shifted. What they overlooked entirely was that your light wasn't freely given. It was earned. You didn't simply awaken with a radiant glow. You endured trials, healed wounds, and made the conscious choice not to succumb to bitterness. Your gentleness is a deliberate choice. Your inner peace is the culmination of battles fought. Your joy is an act of defiance against everything that sought to shatter you. Thus, when individuals approach you with the intention of latching on, leeching off, and leaving you depleted, you sever the connection with grace, with silence, or with distance, but it's severed nonetheless. They believed your light was a weakness, but it served as a warning, a signal that you are not to be manipulated, that divine beauty is accompanied by unwavering boundaries. And the reality is that most individuals are ill-equipped to navigate someone like you, someone who is kind but not naive, generous but not gullible, radiant but not universally accessible. Now they are confounded. Why are their efforts failing? Why did you withdraw? Why can't they access you anymore? It's because they didn't approach you with the intention of honoring your light, but rather of exploiting it. And now that the door is closed, they're stranded outside, attributing blame to your attitude, when in truth they merely encountered your discernment. Number 5, they forgot that God preserves His anointed. They lost sight of whom they were dealing with. They assumed they were merely observing someone blessed with good genetics or a meticulous skincare regimen. They failed to recognize that your glow wasn't derived from facials and vitamins. It was emanating from divine preservation. God has been enveloping you, preserving you, protecting you. That youthful appearance they incessantly comment on isn't solely physical. It's spiritual, a testament to your preservation, not because you were shielded from adversity, but because God ensured that adversity didn't leave its mark. People often associate trials with physical manifestations, wrinkles, bitterness, cynicism. However, in your case, the storm passed through and somehow you emerged softer, lighter, and more radiant. That's not typical. That's not natural. That is supernatural. You didn't merely escape the fire, you were concealed within it. God shielded your essence while life attempted to dismantle you. That's why when they gaze upon you, something feels amiss. You possess inner peace despite having endured war. You exude gentleness despite having survived betrayal. You remain composed despite having navigated chaos. They are only now comprehending the true meaning of being anointed. It signifies divine intervention, divine defense, divine delay. You don't conduct yourself as they anticipate because your entire journey has been under the guidance and protection of a power greater than yourself. And when they sought to tamper with you, presuming you were merely another face, another light to extinguish, another individual to manipulate, they unwittingly trespassed upon a spiritual boundary line. It is at this juncture that everything shifts. They are discovering that interfering with you is not a personal matter. It's a spiritual violation, because when God sets someone apart, they are not to be approached with disrespect. Favor envelops your life, safeguarding you even when you are unaware. Angels safeguard your steps when no one is observing. There have been instances when you were destined to be shattered, yet somehow you remained intact. They believed they were attacking you, but what they truly did was challenge God's appointment. And now they are grappling with unforeseen consequences, not because you retaliated, but because He did. Number 6, Your appearance led them to underestimate your history. They glanced at your countenance and believed they had deciphered you entirely too flawless, too composed, too unconcerned. Thus, they presumed you hadn't lived much, that you were unfamiliar with true pain, that you were inexperienced, untested, untouched by life's darker aspects. However, they couldn't have been more mistaken, because behind that youthful visage lies a wealth of experiences, lessons, heartbreaks, recoveries, and divine revelations that most individuals don't accumulate in a lifetime. You've weathered battles so intricate and discreet that even your closest confidants are oblivious to your survival. Yet here you stand, radiant as if untouched by the flames. They perceived you as naive, but they were unaware that you had already navigated manipulation so subtle it required years to fully comprehend. They were unaware of the countless instances you had smiled across tables at those who were betraying you behind your back. They were unaware of the numerous times you had to rebuild your confidence after being undermined by individuals you trusted. They assumed your gentle demeanor signified inexperience. What they failed to recognize was that your composure stemmed from having already weathered the storm. You didn't attain this state by chance. You earned every iota of wisdom, every ounce of peace, every fragment of clarity you now possess. You weren't simply born this way. You were crafted in the darkness, in the quietude, when no one applauded, when no one offered assistance, and when you had to rescue yourself. The smile they witness is a miracle. The glow is a result of choosing not to allow pain to defile you. Your softness is fortified with spiritual muscle. So now they are perplexed. They cannot comprehend how someone who appears so youthful can be so resilient, so wise, so grounded. But that's the outcome when individuals judge solely based on outward appearances. They are realizing that you are not merely someone who reads about warfare. You have lived it. You're not merely reciting platitudes about healing. You have undergone the arduous process of navigating it. You are not a novice. You have been trained in silence, equipped through suffering, and preserved by God. And regardless of how youthful your face appears, your soul possesses the authority of someone who has traversed hell and emerged triumphant. Number 7. They mistook soft features for a weak resolve. They observed your delicate features and made the perilous assumption that they lacked underlying strength. To them, gentleness equated to vulnerability. Kindness equated to inexperience. And because you didn't exude aggression or boisterousness, they presumed you were incapable of defending yourself. However, they were oblivious to the fact that your resilience was forged from some of the most challenging experiences a person can endure. You didn't simply awaken with inner fortitude. You were compelled to cultivate it. They were unaware of the numerous instances you were betrayed and had to continue functioning as if nothing had occurred. They didn't witness the nights you wept yourself to sleep, but still arose the next morning and fulfilled your obligations. They didn't witness the repeated attempts to crush your spirit, and instead of succumbing, you grew stronger in silence. Every smile you display has been tested. Every boundary you establish originated from being pushed beyond your limits repeatedly. You didn't become resilient through shouting. You became resilient by refusing to yield when the world urged you to surrender. Your strength is concealed within your restraint. You don't engage in every battle. You don't pursue every insult. You don't retaliate every time someone disrespects you, and that's why they assumed you lacked resolve, because you didn't react as they anticipated. However, the truth is that your restraint is a source of power. It required immense effort to prevent this world from hardening you. It took extraordinary strength to resist mirroring the animosity directed at you. That's not weakness, that's mastery. They believed you would falter, bend, or be easily controlled. But now they are realizing you are composed of something they cannot manipulate: determination. You are not loud, but you are immovable. You are not malicious, but you are resolute when it comes to your values. They cannot comprehend how someone so calm, so agreeable, can be so unyielding when provoked. That's because your strength wasn't cultivated in comfort. It was forged in the crucible. And now the very individuals who sought to overpower you are the ones attempting to decipher how you maintain your composure without ever resorting to aggression. Number 8. They came to dominate but ended up exposed. They arrived believing they held the upper hand. They were convinced they were more intelligent, more experienced, more in control. They came armed with strategies, manipulation, and psychological games. They were prepared to dominate, to twist your words, to ensnare you in a web of confusion where they would invariably wield the power. However, the instant they entered your sphere, something shifted. What they failed to anticipate was your energy. It didn't engage in conflict. It didn't pursue, it didn't participate in their games. It simply revealed the longer they lingered near you, the more their mask began to slip. Without you uttering a single word, their insecurities surfaced, their guilt intensified, their shame magnified, their lies unraveled. You didn't have to expose them, your presence sufficed. They believed you were someone they could mold and control, but you were a mirror, and mirrors don't deceive. That's what unnerved them. They expected you to be bewildered. Instead, they found themselves unraveling in your silence. You didn't attack. You observed. You allowed them to speak. You allowed them to reveal their true nature. And what they didn't foresee was how uncomfortable that would become, because your energy was pure while theirs was tainted. Your spirit was grounded while theirs was fragmented. They entered with pride and a desire for control, but by the time they realized what was transpiring, they were confronting all the aspects of themselves they sought to conceal. You appeared to be an easy target, someone they could deceive, exploit, or emotionally corner, but you ultimately served as the catalyst that exposed the depth of their own brokenness and the shallowness of their tactics. And now they are loath to approach you, not because you harmed them, but because they cannot conceal themselves from their own reflection when they are in your presence. That's what renders you formidable. You don't have to fight for truth. You embody it. You don't have to denounce darkness. It reveals itself in your presence. You were never the one being tested. They were, and the result was that you remained grounded while they disintegrated. You were not their prey. You were their lesson. Number 9, you looked like a toy but moved like a tool of God. They approached you as if you were a plaything, something to toy with, test, control, or amuse themselves with. They saw your light and assumed it signified softness. They saw your composure and assumed it indicated cluelessness. In their estimation, you were a puzzle to be solved, a game to be won, an individual to be managed. However, what they encountered was not weak. What they mishandled was not ordinary. It was anointed, protected, set apart, and that error cost them dearly. They didn't realize it initially because you don't exude arrogance. You don't flaunt your power. You allow individuals to make assumptions. You grant them the space to reveal themselves, and that's precisely what they did. They revealed their motives. They exposed their arrogance. They displayed their true intentions. While they were attempting to decipher you, they inadvertently stepped into a spiritual trap they had constructed for you only to trigger it themselves. You operated differently. You responded with grace when they expected rage. You remained silent when they sought to provoke drama. You disengaged when they attempted to lure you into chaos. They were searching for emotional vulnerability, but all they encountered was divine restraint. That was their initial indication that you were not who they assumed. They believed they were dealing with someone easily manipulated, but they ended up confronting a vessel that had been refined by God. That's the aspect that now terrifies them, not merely that their attempts to exploit you failed, but that their actions revealed their true character. Others noticed. You didn't have to expose them. Their own actions divulged the truth. Their credibility waned. People began to question their integrity. Things began to unravel. And all of this transpired not because you retaliated, but because God safeguards what He anoints. You were never the toy. You were the test. You were sent to expose hearts, to shake hidden motives, and to reveal the truth. And now that the dust has settled, they are realizing they were never in control. They believed they were playing a game, but they were standing on sacred ground, and now they are grappling with the consequences of mistaking God's vessel for something disposable. Number 10. Your grace disarmed them, but your wisdom dismantled them. Initially, they were captivated by your grace, your demeanor, the gentleness of your tone. It all seemed safe, inviting, and disarming. You didn't arrive with arrogance. You didn't seek to impress anyone. You didn't vie for attention, and that's precisely what drew them in. They believed they had encountered someone gentle enough to influence, malleable enough to control. They were so fixated on your outward beauty that they neglected to prepare for your depth. They remained close, believing they held the upper hand. You weren't confrontational. You didn't raise your voice. You provided space for others to express themselves. That put them at ease, perhaps too at ease, and just when they felt they could predict your every move, you opened your mouth and began to speak, not casually, not for show, but with divine precision, with wisdom not derived from books, gossip, or fleeting trends, but from God, from lived experiences, from scars that had been healed, not concealed. The moment you spoke truth, something within them fractured. They heard something they were unprepared to hear, not because it was unkind, but because it was undeniably clear. You weren't attempting to prove anything, yet your words carried weight. So to wrap things up, remember that your youthful glow, that radiant spirit, isn't a sign of naivety. It's a testament to your inner strength, a reflection of battles fought and wisdom earned. Don't let anyone underestimate the power and depth you hold within. You are a warrior, a wise soul, divinely protected and preserved. Embrace your journey, trust your intuition, and never dim your light for anyone who tries to diminish you. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced being underestimated because of your youthful appearance? What resonated most with you in this message? Share your thoughts, ask a question, or just join the conversation in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this and want to hear more empowering messages like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. That way you won't miss out on future content designed to help you own your power and shine your light. Thanks for being here, Welcome, chosen ones, awakened souls. Truth doesn't whisper, it roars. It disrobes deception, ignites awareness, and cannot be silenced. There exists at this very moment an individual who dared to believe they could warp reality, manipulate your perceptions, and ensnare you in their twisted game. They constructed a labyrinth of falsehoods, envisioning it as your prison, confident that their charade would go unnoticed. But let the undeniable truth resonate. The discerning already perceive the facade. Studies affirm that the human mind possesses an innate capacity for detecting deceit, often registering it even before words are uttered. Thus, every calculated attempt to malign, slander, or target you is met with resounding failure in the theater of reality. Those around them are witnessing their carefully constructed world crumble, captivated as if by the season finale of a suspenseful psychological drama. And let us acknowledge the perverse satisfaction in observing someone labor so diligently to diminish you only to expose the depths of their own darkness. It resembles a feline's futile endeavor to command humans, clumsy, desperate, and destined for failure. Yet beyond the amusement of the spectacle, the stakes are profoundly real. This extends far beyond mere embarrassment. This is a battle for control over perception, the sanctity of truth, and ultimately who emerges unscathed as their intricate plot implodes. By the culmination of this revelation, the reasons behind their descent into instability, obsession, and borderline derangement will be vividly apparent. No tapestry of lies can withstand the luminous truth that you embody. Each action, each carefully crafted word serves as a mirror reflecting their own disintegration. You stand as the unshakable anchor that exposes their charade. First, they are collapsing under the crushing weight of their fabricated reality. Every fabricated narrative intended to ensnare or control you is now becoming their personal trap. The power they sought to wield is dissipating before the eyes of all. The more frantically they cling to their twisted tales, the more impossible it becomes to distinguish truth from fabrication. Each subsequent lie compounds the previous one, creating a web so intricate that even they become entangled, losing their way. Those in their circle begin to notice the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the increasingly bizarre behavior. Slowly, the mask of confidence begins to slip. It is not a conspiracy orchestrated against them. It is simply the inevitable consequence of reality exposing deception. Their fixation on controlling perception has blinded them to the obviousness of their charade. The intent to portray you as weak or unstable now serves only to highlight their own profound instability. Every conversation, every social interaction, every attempt to manipulate circumstances becomes a glaring showcase of their desperation and mental anguish. Observers can discern the anxiety concealed behind their words, the tension underpinning their actions, the ever-present fear of exposure. The more frenzied their attempts become, the more visible their collapse. Whispers begin to circulate, judgments are rendered, and stories intended to remain within the confines of private circles suddenly become public knowledge. The world bears witness to the downfall of someone who once appeared untouchable. Their fabricated reality, once envisioned as a shield, has become their prison. They are trapped within the narratives they have spun, forced to defend indefensible lies. The most agonizing aspect for them is not merely being caught in a single falsehood, but the cumulative impact of years of deceit converging at once. The burden of their constructed world is immense, breaking them piece by piece. Meanwhile, you remain steadfast, unaffected, untouchable. Because this turmoil is not about you. It is about their spiraling loss of control. People observe, they discuss, and the feared label, unstable, obsessive, deranged, begins to adhere organically, not through exaggeration, but as an accurate reflection of their self-inflicted collapse. The lies intended to grant them power over you have instead become the chains that bind them. Each failed maneuver is another crack in the foundation of their fabricated reality. Second, every attempt to control you is now irrefutable evidence of their own unraveling. What they believe to be a clandestine campaign, subtle and unnoticed, has transformed into a glaring spectacle of desperation. Each word, each action designed to manipulate or undermine you is now on full display, the irony biting. They strive to project an image of dominance, but instead they are broadcasting their fear and obsession for the world to witness. Those around them need not delve into intricate investigations. The cracks in their facade are glaringly obvious. Nervous gestures, over-explained excuses, contradictory narratives. Every attempt to conceal their intentions only reinforces the perception of imbalance. Each failed attempt at manipulation adds another layer to the very image they seek to conceal. What was intended to project control instead screams of its absence. The more they push, the more chaotic their presence becomes, and the audience, friends, colleagues, even strangers, senses it instinctively. No trained eye is required to perceive the desperation beneath their actions. Their instability becomes self-evident through its consistency. Patterns emerge that reveal obsession, pettiness, and a fixation that transcends casual concern. People begin to connect the dots without requiring your input, and the resulting picture is stark and individual, dangerously unhinged, fixated entirely upon you. Even minor actions, when viewed within the broader context, become evidence of their unraveling. Efforts to control your narrative backfire spectacularly as the world sees their desperate attempts overcompensating in ways that are both obvious and alarming. Their instability is not concealed. It is amplified with each successive move. What they once hoped would intimidate or confuse now convinces everyone that the problem lies not with you, but with them. Their obsession, their lies, their relentless attempts at manipulation become a self-documenting record of mental and emotional instability. They are creating a real-time chronicle of their own disintegration. As they struggle to maintain a false image, their instability becomes increasingly visible. While they believed they were orchestrating control, they have inadvertently created a showcase of their own fragility, and the world is a captivated audience. Third, their lies are morphing into mirrors reflecting their true selves with unflinching clarity. Each story they have fabricated, each accusation leveled, each attempt to twist reality is now bouncing back upon them instead of finding its intended target. Their aim was to manipulate perception, sowing fear and doubt, yet they failed to recognize that truth possesses the remarkable ability to expose the teller. The more forcefully they cling to a narrative divorced from reality, the more readily people discern the fissures between their words and the observable world. Their obsession becomes palpable, their insecurities transparent, and their compulsion to control laid bare. What was meant to project strength only underscores their profound weakness. Lies are burdensome, demanding immense energy, unwavering attention, and laser-like focus. Over time, their behavior becomes increasingly erratic, for maintaining a false reality is an utterly exhausting endeavor. Every detail they attempt to fabricate, every conversation they manipulate adds weight to a reflection from which they cannot escape. Observers begin to detect patterns, the exaggerated reactions, the inherent contradictions, the perpetual defensiveness. What they sought to conceal is now glaringly obvious, and those around them begin to grasp the underlying truth without even seeking confirmation from you. Their actions resonate far louder than the words they sought to plant, revealing an obsession that teeters on the brink of compulsion. People begin to recognize the hallmarks of someone pathologically invested in controlling another individual. This recognition invariably leads to judgment. Their lies no longer serve as a shield, they expose them. Even casual observers begin to perceive the imbalance, the irrational fixation, and the underlying insecurity that fuels it all. Every attempt to spin the narrative to perpetuate the illusion only renders the mirror clearer. Their own reflection reveals an individual consumed by envy, fear, and a desperate craving for dominance, the very antithesis of their intended projection. What is most striking is the utter automatism of this process. They remain oblivious to the fact that they are providing the very evidence against themselves. Their actions intended to distort reality now stand as irrefutable proof of their obsession, their instability, and their utter lack of control. People are not merely observing their actions. They are seeing the very essence of their being. Their identity, once concealed behind a veil of lies, is now laid bare, and the view is far from flattering. Every interaction, every conversation, every attempt at manipulation serves as a brushstroke in a portrait of their own, unraveling a portrait that cannot be unseen. In attempting to define you, they have unwittingly defined themselves, and the world is a captive audience. Fourth, you are the magnet that draws out their hidden vulnerabilities. Their presence in your life serves as a distorting mirror, reflecting not your true self but the flaws they desperately try to keep hidden, yet invariably fail to do. Every attempt they launch to target, intimidate, or manipulate you not only fizzles out but backfires spectacularly, highlighting cracks in their own character that were previously concealed. They believe their schemes are ingenious, their lies undetectable, their control absolute. Yet in reality, each move they make serves as further evidence of their own profound flaws. Their anger, their overreactions, their desperate attempts at influence serve as a stark reminder for the entire world, proving their instability is not merely an internal struggle, but a visible, tangible, and undeniable reality. You did not initiate the drama, yet your steady presence forces them to confront it nonetheless. They struggle to maintain their carefully crafted facade, yet with every slip, every inconsistency, every instance of overcompensation, they are exposed to the world around them. People start to notice patterns, the obsessive attention, the petty attacks, the desperate need to be seen as powerful. These are the traits they sought to conceal. Yet their fixation on you broadcasts them louder than any words could ever convey. The more they try to control or target you, the more obvious their vulnerabilities become. It's as if their energy is being used against themselves. Every lie they tell, every manipulation attempt, every calculated move requires considerable effort, focus, and attention, but instead of destabilizing you, they destabilize themselves. Their obsession becomes all-consuming, leaving no room for clarity or self-awareness, and their own flaws start to dominate their every action. The very qualities they hope to mask. Jealousy, insecurity, arrogance, volatility, shine brighter than ever. People begin to piece together a picture of someone who is unraveling not because of you, but because of their own destructive behavior. You are not merely untouchable. You are the unavoidable truth that forces them into exposure. They can try to deflect, justify, or intimidate, but nothing can hide their blatant flaws. Their character vulnerabilities are now on full display, plain for anyone to see. You remain steady, strong, and grounded while they flail desperately, trying to regain control. Your presence doesn't create chaos. It illuminates it, revealing every imperfection they thought could stay hidden. And in that light, the world sees them clearly. The problem was never you. The problem has always been their own inner turmoil. Fifth, everyone notices the widening chasm between their words and the reality they desperately try to conceal. The moment an individual begins to proclaim one thing but consistently acts in a completely contradictory manner, people take notice. Human intuition is finely tuned to detect such inconsistencies and repeated contradictions between their claims and the stark reality surrounding them, create a palpable tension that cannot be ignored. Every exaggeration, every false accusation, every manipulative ploy is weighed against the truth that surrounds you. People instinctively sense when reality clashes with their carefully constructed narrative. And the more they try to force a story that isn't true, the more obvious their disconnect becomes. This is not a subtle phenomenon. It's a glaring pattern forming in plain sight. Friends, colleagues, even casual observers begin to sense that something is amiss. What they intended as a controlled message designed to influence perception now backfires spectacularly, leaving their credibility in tatters. The ever-widening gap between their words and the truth doesn't merely make them appear unreliable, it makes them seem fundamentally unstable. People begin to question their motives, their judgment, and even their mental state. Every lie they utter, every story they spin serves as a stark contrast to the openness and truthfulness with which you live your life. Observers don't need to engage in deep analysis. They can feel it instinctively. There's a palpable tension between what is said and what is real, and that tension reflects poorly on them, not on you. The more they try to reinforce their warped narrative, the more the world sees the desperation driving their actions. Their attempts to control perception only highlight their own irrationality and their obsessive tendencies. They may believe they're pulling strings or shaping opinions, but in reality their behavior serves as irrefutable evidence of their own instability. Eventually, this disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. People begin to share observations, to connect the dots, and to quietly or openly call out the blatant inconsistencies. Their credibility erodes piece by piece, and the perception that they are obsessive, controlling, or even psychologically unbalanced becomes self-evident. While they scramble to maintain control over their image, the world is already drawing conclusions based on observable reality, not on the lies they are being fed. The more they push, the wider the disconnect grows, and the more apparent it becomes that their credibility is collapsing under the immense weight of their own deception. Their words no longer hold sway, because reality and the people who witness it will always speak louder than any falsehood. Sixth, their obsession with you is becoming their own impenetrable prison. Every attempt they launch to control or manipulate you slowly turns against them, constructing a trap from which they cannot escape. In their twisted minds, they imagine themselves as the predator, but in reality, they have become the prisoner. Each lie they told, each scheme they plotted, each effort to infiltrate your life adds another bar to the cage they are building around themselves. Their obsession consumes them entirely, leaving no room for rational thought, for self-reflection, or even for basic peace of mind. Every action meant to destabilize you only tightens the grip of their own mental and emotional confinement. People around them begin to notice patterns. The constant pacing, the compulsive overthinking, the repeated attempts to insert themselves where they simply don't belong. It becomes clear that their energy is not being spent on productive or healthy endeavors, but entirely focused on tracking, influencing, or undermining you. Their behavior starts to appear erratic, desperate, and overwhelmingly obsessive. The more they try to escape the consequences of their actions, the deeper they sink into the prison they constructed themselves. Those watching on the sidelines do not see a calculating mastermind. They see someone utterly trapped by their own unhealthy fixation. The label of psycho is not an exaggeration, nor is it an insult in this context. It's a logical conclusion drawn from observation. Their actions, driven by their unchecked obsession, are demonstrably irrational, unstable, and harmful to themselves. What was meant to intimidate or manipulate you has backfired entirely. The world sees a person imprisoned not by external forces, but by their own internal compulsions. Every lie, every attempt to control, every act of intimidation becomes another brick in the walls that surround them. Meanwhile, you remain unaffected, free, and clear. Their chaos does not touch you because you are not the one ensnared. They are. In trying to dominate your life, they have surrendered all control over their own. Their obsession, once hidden beneath the surface, now defines them publicly. And the reality of their self-made prison is undeniable. They are caught in a relentless cycle of fear, envy, and unhealthy fixation from which they cannot break free, and the more they struggle, the more visible their entrapment becomes. You are the calm, steady presence that exists outside their cage, witnessing the unraveling of someone who thought they could control you, only to find themselves completely confined by the very obsession they created. Seventh, every lie they tell adds to their own ever-growing isolation. Each false story, each exaggeration, each attempt to manipulate the narrative does not just fail to reach its intended target. It pushes away anyone who might have otherwise supported or even tolerated them. The more they escalate, the more apparent it becomes that their actions are driven by all-consuming obsession, not sound reason. People instinctively sense when someone is too focused on another person in a way that is profoundly unhealthy, and what might have started as curiosity or mild concern quickly transforms into distance and distrust. Every lie they tell acts as a brick in the wall that separates them from social trust, empathy, and credibility. Their attempts to control perception or sabotage your reputation backfire spectacularly. Because obsession is always visible, it spreads, but not in the way they intend. Instead of drawing people to their cause, it repels them. Friends, acquaintances, colleagues, and even casual observers begin to question their motives and their overall character. They notice the contradictions, the wild exaggerations, the disproportionate reactions, and instead of sympathizing with them, people start to quietly step back. The network of support they might have relied on begins to crumble, replaced by quiet judgment, outright avoidance, or even open ridicule. The social credibility they once assumed or maintained through false appearances evaporates under the immense weight of repeated deceit. What makes it worse for them is that this self-imposed isolation reinforces their already unhealthy obsession. Feeling increasingly cut off from others, they desperately double down, foolishly believing that if they simply try harder, they can somehow regain control. However, every failed attempt only intensifies the fixation, creating a vicious, inescapable cycle. The lies pile up, the obsession grows even stronger, and with it the separation from reality and from the people who might have once seen them in a more positive light. Their world becomes smaller, narrower, and increasingly lonelier with each manipulative act. Meanwhile, you remain unaffected, moving freely throughout reality while they shrink into a self-imposed social vacuum. What was meant to harm you becomes the very mechanism that destroys their social standing. Their own obsession isolates them, exposes their instability, and removes any potential allies they might have had. In trying to control the narrative about you, they have effectively cut themselves off from the narrative of life itself, leaving only a hollow, self-created bubble of obsession, paranoia, and overwhelming loneliness. Eighth, their inconsistencies are an open book for others to easily read. Every contradiction, every sudden change in their story, every overreaction is dutifully recorded, noticed, and remembered by those around them. When confronted with factual evidence, they do not remain consistent. They fumble, they awkwardly adjust their claims, or they desperately overcompensate, revealing far more than they ever intended. Each erratic reaction adds another line to the pattern of their behavior, a readily discernible pattern that anyone paying even minimal attention can easily follow without needing your input. Their attempts to manipulate perception, control narratives, or justify their increasingly questionable actions only serve to highlight the inconsistencies. Every lie, every exaggeration, every outright denial is a piece of self-incriminating evidence they are unwittingly providing to everyone around them. People are naturally adept at detecting behavioral patterns, and repeated contradictions quickly form a clear picture of obsession and instability. What they foolishly hope will confuse or intimidate others ends up having the opposite effect. Observers begin to map their behavior, noticing the cyclical patterns of falsehood, unwarranted defensiveness, and emotional escalation. The more they try to cover their tracks, the more transparent they become. Even casual acquaintances start to recognize the telltale signs. Sudden shifts in tone, overly explained excuses, stories that simply don't align with verifiable reality. Each of these small moments reinforces the perception that their behavior is erratic, extreme, and fundamentally unhealthy. The psycho label doesn't need to be artificially applied. It emerges organically from simple observation. Their own glaring inconsistencies provide the damning evidence, and the world logically interprets that evidence. People see someone who is clearly obsessed, demonstrably unstable, and hopelessly trapped in their own tangled web of lies. It's not your responsibility to point it out. The behavioral patterns speak for themselves. The more they attempt to maintain an illusion of control or manipulate perception, the more obvious their psychological unraveling becomes. Their inconsistencies are not minor slips. They are cumulative in their devastating effect. Each small error adds to the larger, more complete story, and the audience consciously or subconsciously pieces together the undeniable truth. Attempts to appear rational or in control fail spectacularly because their actions so consistently contradict their words. What they hoped would secure influence or instill doubt instead confirms the exact opposite. They are clearly fixated, fundamentally irrational, and completely transparent to anyone who is paying even a modicum of attention. In trying to hide their obsession, they have written it clearly in plain sight for all to see. Their behavior becomes a textbook example of self-exposure, where every misguided effort to manipulate the world around them only makes them more visible, more predictable, and more undeniably unstable. Ninth, you are the immovable constant in their self-created chaos. No matter how intensely they try to provoke, manipulate, or intimidate you, nothing ever seems to work. Every scheme, every desperate attempt to destabilize your life fails because your presence remains steady, consistent, and unshakable. This unwavering consistency is not just frustrating for them, it's ultimately terrifying. They thrive on control, on bending circumstances and people to their whims, and your inherent immunity to their manipulative tactics exposes their powerlessness in the most glaring possible way. The more they push, the more obvious it becomes to everyone that their efforts are utterly futile. Others can see it with undeniable clarity. People notice the stark contrast between their frantic attempts to dominate and your calm, grounded demeanor. Every overreaction, every desperate lie, every erratic move they make is thrown into stark relief against your inherent stability. You become the lens through which their instability is magnified for all to see. Their obsession, their paranoia, and their increasingly irrational behavior are highlighted not by your words, but by the unwavering strength you display simply by existing unperturbed and unshaken. Observers begin to understand the underlying truth instinctively. The chaos is not originating from you. It's coming from them, and you are the sole reason it's so clearly visible to everyone. So to bring it all together, remember that your truth, your unwavering presence, is an incredibly powerful force. It's a beacon that exposes deception and ultimately reveals the inner turmoil of those who try to manipulate and control. Their actions intended to diminish you instead become a mirror reflecting their own instability and ultimately leading to their undoing. You, by simply remaining authentic and grounded, become the anchor that exposes their charade. It's a testament to the strength within you and the inherent power of truth. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever experienced anything similar, or do you have any insights or questions you'd like to share? Please feel free to leave a comment down below. I'm really interested in hearing your perspectives and continuing this important conversation. And if this resonated with you, and you want to delve deeper into topics of truth, self-empowerment, and navigating challenging situations, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future content. We've got a lot more to explore together. Thanks so much for watching. Much for watching. Much for watching. Much for watching. Much for